I'm Peter Underwood and this is News from the Water. Canal Trust backs Tory plan for more chain gangs on the towpaths. Canal and River Trust is being briefed as being one of the prime beneficiaries of a new Tory plan to double the number of tagged offenders required to carry out community work. More offenders will be told to clear rubbish from waterways in what the right-wing newspapers are labelling as chain gangs, in an initiative the Tories are promoting as a law and order crackdown in the aftermath of the rape and murder of Sarah Everard by a serving policeman. At the Tory conference in Manchester, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said the number of offenders forced to wear tags will double. And journalists were briefed that those ordered to carry out unpaid work by a court will be required to clean hundreds of miles of towpaths under an agreement with the Canal and River Trust. They'll wear high visibility community payback tabards while doing so. Now it will mark a significant ramping up of existing schemes. However, the scheme has been labelled as unworkable by the Police Federation and the civil liberties group Liberty says that the idea is designed to create more stigma and division. Raab claims an extra 10,000 robbers, burglars and thieves will be fitted with tags at a cost of £183 million, and it seems CRT is destined to be a major beneficiary. So we asked the Trust for a response to the announcements at the Tory conference in Manchester, and it seems they're unconcerned by any moral questions that arise when a charity makes use of forced labour. An official statement said, "The Canal and River Trust is delighted to be working in partnership with the Ministry of Justice as the first of a number of national partnerships they intend to develop to help grow community payback, known as unpaid work, over the next 3 years. The Trust has worked with probation services in the past, such as in the West Midlands, but this partnership provides the opportunity and probation resources to roll this out to additional areas and waterways. It will help us carry out basic maintenance, conservation and environmental improvements that will benefit users of the waterways and the wider community. The Trust's commitment to community rehabilitation through work with the Ministry of Justice will continue to enhance the nation's historic waterways, but also provide people on probation with useful work skills and a sense of ownership in their local communities that we hope will last beyond their involvement with unpaid work." Well, that's what the Trust says. Those boaters who've seen paint being slapped on historic structures by workers who are being forced to do so might question the real value of community payback chain gangs, of course. Before the taps run dry. Now, the commercial water companies are reported to be planning to build vast new reservoirs to deal with water shortages caused by hot, dry summers and wetter winters as global warming continues. And they are saying they want to use canals to move the water around the country. Nothing really new there, but the privatised water firms have now launched a £500 million plan to build up supplies in reservoirs and to increase the recycling of sewage water so it can be pumped back into the network. There's even a plan for a desalination plant on the south coast. And plans now exist for vast reservoir half the size of Lake Windermere in Oxfordshire, south of Abingdon, which would serve London and the Midlands. Another would be in South Lincolnshire, and that would store water from the rivers Trent and Witham when river flows allow this, possibly using what's called an open water transfer, or canal as we like to call it. There's going to be a Fenland reservoir in East Anglia, planned around the Ouse washers and serving Cambridge. And there are 15 schemes in total. The concept is that they'll store more water in the winter and use canals and pipelines to transfer it to drought areas in the summer. And the companies are also looking at other major schemes, including transferring water from the Severn to the Thames by way of the Grand Union Canal, which can also be used to transfer water from the sewage works of the Midlands to customers in Hertfordshire and London. Now, the programme is being overseen by a body called RAPID, the Regulators Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development. It's catchy, isn't it? And that includes Ofwat, the Environment Agency and the Drinking Water Inspectorate. And it's supported by the Consumer Council for Water, by Natural England and Natural Resources Wales. However, it seems that despite the key role for canals in the plans, the Canal and River Trust is not directly involved in this planning. Of course, the water shortages that now seem inevitable in the future will also affect canals and their use. And the plans provoke some vital questions for CRT. Do they, for instance, need more reservoirs, or will making the existing ones fit for purpose, which they're currently attempting to do, suffice to keep the network navigable? Will using canals for water transfer put additional and perhaps damaging pressure on the historic canal structures? And might it perhaps provide the water so many canals desperately require? On the other hand, will extracting waters from rivers like the Severn and the Trent make them even less navigable? Now, are these plans a possible trigger for upgrading some canals to larger dimensions in order to make commercial traffic viable again? And will fees from the water companies be sufficient to finance that sort of expansion? It'll certainly be interesting to see what role the Trust is able to take as these major developments play out. River Lee issues stir up again. The so-called safety zones on the River Lee in London remain a highly contentious issue, with passions easily stirred over the hundreds of mooring spots local liveaboard boaters fear will be lost if Canal and River Trust go ahead with plans to restrict large sections of the river in the name of safety for rowers. An independent report ruled against the Trust, who temporarily backed off, but it left a potential loophole for further action by CRT when the consultants agreed that there was a responsibility to enforce existing rules, regulations and guidance, with the Trust insisting these were not new rules in any way. But nothing remained secret for long on the cut, and vigilant boaters had been talking to CRT staff who were training the car park company district enforcement to patrol the Lee in those disputed areas. CRT is also now erecting signs there where there have never been signs before, and the trainees appear to be given information that directly contradicts current practices on the river, particularly in relation to where double mooring is allowed and which bends are too sharp for safe mooring. Now, in its response to the independent consultant, CRT made a big thing about educating people about existing rules and allowing them time to become accustomed to rules they might not have been aware of. Now there is a nasty suspicion that a peeved and vindictive Canal and River Trust, having lost the opening battle, is now intent on introducing a whole set of new rules, claiming they're old rules, and they were already there but they simply hadn't been enforced. Well, there's little doubt that such devious behaviour will be loudly and publicly challenged by London's boating community, and the Trust will once again find itself on the sticky end of some national publicity and more public protests, perhaps leading to another humiliating climb down. We shall wait and see. Open water is in demand. There is a massively increased demand for public access to open water, according to the Daily Telegraph at least, and it comes from wild swimmers, canoeists and anglers. Canoeists, campaigners and wild swimmers alike have reported threatening and verbal abuse from British landowners, says the newspaper, and it points to the example of the River Cam, which flows through central Cambridge's Grantchester Meadows and has been a high-profile battleground where for hundreds of years people have come to bathe, punt and latterly canoe. But this summer, in 2021, King's College, who own the riverbank and have done since 1485, put up signs banning swimmers from access to the water by way of their land. They claimed that too many people were using it, ruining the environment and causing serious risk to life, apparently. After a 21,000 signature petition condemned King's and explicitly linked the college's decisions with opposition to the government's current controversial police crime sentencing and courts bill, which they claimed shrinks the right to roam on a national scale, King's backed off and began discussions with users around how to better manage the meadows and it's business as usual, which has quietly resumed along the Cam. Now, the Daily Telegraph suggests that the thousands who turned mid-pandemic to wild swimming and kayaking to escape lockdown are now demanding better treatment, with British Canoeing, the national governing body for paddle sports, seeing membership double since March 2020 from around 38,500 to 84,500. All those people want somewhere to put their boats in the water. And of course anyone on the inland waterways will have seen the boom in canoes and paddle boards on the canals already, and it's been actively encouraged by Canal and River Trust. And that leads on to another question for the Trust. Will they allow or perhaps even encourage wild swimming? I mean, clearly only the deranged would want to dunk themselves in some urban ditch with historically high levels of industrial pollution, sewage outfalls and regular spillages from canal-side businesses. But the Trust also looks after some major rivers, although it may not have, or at least always have, full riparian rights. And some canals are stream-fed or include river sections and could easily be fit for wild swimming. Now, most boaters, of course, would find the prospect of sharing water with the bobbing and near-invisible heads of wild swimmers terrifying. But that didn't stop the Trust allowing canoeists into long tunnels, so who knows? But the boaters may well have the anglers' backing, as they do on some rivers. Like boaters, anglers purchase licences to fish stretches of water, and when they see swimmers and canoeists passing down the same stretches of water without having paid a penny, it can bring out the worst in them. Tell them what they're looking at. During my couple of decades on the waterways, I've often thought that Canal and River Trust and British Waterways before them have completely failed to make an asset of the history of which the canals are a key part. There are the museums, of course, at Ellesmere Port and Gloucester, and there are some areas, like parts of the Black Country, where places of special interests are signed on the canal bank, on the towpath. We were fascinated a few years ago to see the site where casings for Barnes-Wallis bouncing bombs were made. Unfortunately, only to learn recently that the sign isn't really accurate and they never were made there. But that to one side, there are many sites that have a fascination of their own, and boater Andy Williams has been urging others in the National Association of Boat Owners to persuade CRT to adopt the waterways equivalent of the brown heritage signs seen on roads around the country. He says,
This is a serious suggestion. There is a lot of heritage on and by the canals. All sorts of interesting stuff. Whether you're a canal enthusiast, a lover of industrial archaeology, or just plain curious. Take the other day when by chance I discovered that the pub I was about to visit, the Wolsey Arms, was where the plans for the Trent and Mersey Canal were hatched. There were no signs about this on the nearby canal, yet it was real heritage stuff. The use of brown roadside signs to highlight nearby tourist-type stuff is well established. How about CRT adopt the same scheme and apply it to those using the canals and towpaths to highlight nearby heritage, not necessarily 100% canal-related?
More or less, CRT won't tell. Now, those with long memories may recall that back in August we reported on what appeared to be a shortage of customer facilities, especially bins, in certain parts of the waterways, particularly in the northwest region. News from the Water asked CRT, "Can you tell us how many operational facilities blocks CRT now has and how that compares with 10 years ago, and whether the services at each still open block have been reduced or removed?" They promised to have a look, but failed to find an answer for that edition, and eventually came back to ask us to clarify, which we did, and then there was silence for week after week. This week we got round to asking again for an answer, and we were provided with a spreadsheet which listed the current facilities blocks and what was available at each. And I was also told Biff will look after about 250 sites for CRT, but there was nothing there I could use to compare the situation now with a decade earlier. The best the Public Relations Department could offer was to say, regarding historic data on facilities, I've been told we don't hold that information. Really? Honestly? Would it be rude to say I don't believe that? God. That's all for this week. Thanks for watching.
We need video and photos of all aspects of the waterways. Email files to peterunderwood2@gmail.com with your name and a brief description of it and where and when it was shot.